After the accident, the millionaire's son closed himself off from the world. Silence took over the house until a new nanny arrived with a different way of caring. In just a few days, the boy smiled again. But what she does next is so surprising that it makes the millionaire make a decision that changes the fate of the three forever. The chime of the private elevator arriving at the 67th floor was a sound Henry barely registered. A mere hum in the background of a symphony of market notifications and international video conferences. From his Italian leather armchair, strategically positioned before the glass wall that framed the organized chaos of Manhattan, he controlled an empire. His fortune, built with a surgeon's precision on the stock market, stretched across a tangle of stocks, hedge funds, and even daring forays into cryptocurrency. A volatile universe he dominated with the same coolness he used to analyze his business balance sheets. The penthouse, a triumph of minimalism, reflected his mind. Flawless surfaces, straight lines, and a glaring absence of anything that could be considered alive except for the view of the city pulsing below. It was a sanctuary of control, a place where chance had no say. But chance, on that rainy afternoon, had a name and wore a yellow scarf in her hair. The elevator doors slid open, and the figure that emerged looked nothing like the previous candidates, women with impeccable resumes and rehearsed smiles. This one was young, with a look that seemed to carry more stories than years, and she was pushing, with a disconcerting gentleness, an empty wheelchair. Henry's assistant, a woman as polished as the marble in the foyer, gestured to introduce her. But the young woman ignored her with a firm politeness. Her eyes swept the sterile environment and landed on Henry, not with the deference his net worth usually inspired, but with a direct, almost analytical assessment. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice soft but without a hint of hesitation. "Before I meet the boy, I need to see his room. May I?" The question was a formality. Her posture indicated she was going anyway. Henry felt a wave of irritation crawl up his spine. Audacity. In his world, where every second was monetized and every move calculated for profit, that demand was a waste of time, a breach of protocol. He managed capital that could buy small countries, his assets a fortress of financial security, and here she was, a nanny candidate, dictating the terms. He was about to dismiss her with a wave of his hand, to delegate the messy task to his assistant. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the yellow scarf, a splash of sun on a gray day. Or maybe the way she pushed the empty chair, not as a symbol of absence, but as a space to be filled, a promise. There was a scent about her that the distance couldn't disguise, something that recalled banana bread fresh from the oven, an aroma of simple life that violently clashed with the rarefied air of his penthouse. He stood up, his perfectly tailored suit not wrinkling an inch. His curiosity, an emotion he usually reserved for high-risk investments, overcame his irritation. Who was this woman who, instead of being impressed by his wealth, seemed more interested in the four walls that housed his greatest failure? He watched as she moved down the hallway, her steps silent, the chair gliding smoothly over the polished hardwood floor. She didn't look back, confident that he would follow, and he did. Every step toward his son's room was a step away from his comfort zone, a territory where dividends and compound interest meant absolutely nothing. For the first time in a long time, Henry didn't know what to expect, and the feeling was as terrifying as a crash in his most valuable stocks. He stopped at the threshold, watching her pause in the center of the silent room, and a knot formed in his throat. She wasn't just looking at a room, she was reading a story of pain. Gabriel's room was the materialization of Henry's love and guilt. Every object, from the orthopedic bed imported from Germany to the bookshelf with educational books organized by color, had been chosen with the care of someone making a high-risk investment, hoping for a return that never came. It was a safe, sterile and silent environment designed by a team of specialists to optimize recovery. For Henry, it represented the best his money could buy. For Anna, who stood in the center of the room with the empty wheelchair beside her, the room looked like a mausoleum. There wasn't a single crooked drawing on the wall, a toy out of place, a sign that a child lived there. The grey linen curtains, automated and impersonal, blocked the pale light of the rainy afternoon, plunging the space into a perpetual gloom. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air, overpowering any trace of childhood. She walked slowly to the window, her fingers tracing the outline of a plastic superhero on the shelf, still in its original packaging. She didn't look at the panoramic view of the Upper East Side, a sea of buildings and wealth that Henry so prized. Instead, she watched the way the raindrops slid down the glass, distorting the world outside. The assistant, Beatrice, cleared her throat at the door, her discomfort evident. "Miss Anna, is it? Mr. Wright has an extremely busy schedule. If you could just tell us your qualifications." But Anna didn't turn around. "The qualifications are in the resume the agency sent," she replied, her voice calm. "What isn't in there is the ability to feel a space. And this room feels sick." The statement hung in the air, charged with an audacity that made Beatrice swallow hard. Henry, who until then had remained a passive observer, felt the blood rush to his face. Sick, he had mobilized the best of his capital, hired the most renowned professionals. None of his most complex business deals had demanded so much of him. "This room," he said, his voice as sharp as steel, "was designed to be the safest and most stimulating environment possible." Anna finally turned to face him, and in her eyes there was no challenge, but a compassion that disarmed him. "Safety isn't everything, Mr. Wright. Where is the room for improvisation, for mess, for the sun?" She gestured to the curtains. "Children need real light, not LED illumination." Beatrice intervened again, her smile forced. "We have a chromotherapy system installed, with cycles programmed to mimic sunlight." Anna cut her off with a gentle gesture. "It's not the same." She bent down, opening the simple messenger bag she carried. From inside, she pulled out a small ceramic pot with a single, stubborn sunflower. It was an explosion of bright yellow in that universe of grey and beige, as out of place as a smile in a boardroom. Henry watched, paralyzed, as she walked to the window and, with unexpected effort, found the manual latch and opened a crack in the armored glass. A sliver of damp air and the muffled sound of the city invaded the silence. She placed the pot on the inner windowsill, the vibrant flower now a sentinel against the day's melancholy. Then she turned to Henry, her gaze firm and calm. "The sun comes in slowly, but it comes in." The sentence was simple, almost a cliché, but in the quiet of that room, it sounded like a prophecy, a promise that even the most controlled of environments could be invaded by life. Henry felt a crack form in the armor he had built around himself, small and thin, but undeniably present. It was the first time since the accident that someone had brought something into that apartment that his fortune couldn't order. The next morning, the sunflower on Gabriel's windowsill seemed like a silent act of rebellion. Henry saw it in a glance as he passed down the hall and felt the same unease as the day before, a mix of irritation and fascination. During breakfast, served at the immense 8-seat dining table that was almost never used, the tension was palpable. On one side, Beatrice, with her tablet in hand, recited the day's agenda like a general on a battlefield. Physical therapy at 9, speech therapy at 10:30, occupational therapy at 2. Each activity was an item on a recovery spreadsheet, a liability to be reversed. On the other side, Anna drank her coffee from a simple mug, listening patiently. Gabriel was between them, in his chair, his gaze lost in the pattern of the marble table, the slice of toast untouched on his plate. He was the center of this universe of intensive care, yet he seemed the most distant object within it. The humidity index is high today, Beatrice pointed out, glancing sideways at Anna. The doctors recommend avoiding going outside to prevent any respiratory complications. It was a warning, a barrier erected with the mortar of professional concern. Anna finished her coffee, wiped her mouth with her napkin, and looked directly at Henry, once again bypassing the intermediary. The rain has stopped. The garden downstairs must smell wonderful, like damp earth. I think Gabriel would like to feel that. The suggestion was so simple, so off-script from the therapies and goals, that it seemed absurd. Henry looked at his son. Gabriel's apathy was a painful constant, a daily reminder of his own absence on that fateful day. Since the accident, the boy's life had become a succession of medical appointments, a full-time job to recover what was lost. The idea of a walk with no defined therapeutic purpose was, in business terms, an investment with no apparent return. Just for 15 minutes, Anna continued, her voice gentle but firm, to breathe some different air. Beatrice opened her mouth to protest, to talk about the risks, the break in routine, but Henry made an almost imperceptible gesture with his hand, silencing her. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the memory of her audacity the day before, or the image of that stubborn flower. He was approving a move outside his strategy, a small risk his gut, not his logic, told him to take. He nodded. 15 minutes. In the building's private garden, the late New York spring had covered the ground with a carpet of pink cherry blossom petals. Anna pushed Gabriel's chair slowly, with no specific destination, maneuvering around puddles that mirrored the gray sky. She didn't talk about exercises or progress. Instead, she pointed to a robin's nest high in a tree, picked up a yellowed leaf and showed the boy its veins, describing how they looked like tiny rivers. Gabriel remained silent, his face expressionless. From his office window, Henry watched the scene, the phone silent in his hand. He was supposed to be on a call with European investors, discussing the profitability of a new tech fund, but his eyes were fixed on the two figures below. He felt like a watchman, a controller, but at the same time, an intruder. Then, a stronger gust of wind descended between the buildings, rustling the crowns of the cherry trees. A shower of pink petals swirled in the air, dancing before falling gently upon them. The wind tousled Gabriel's hair, touched his face. Anna stopped and just smiled, looking up at the sky. Gabriel, who had kept his chin down for months, lifted his face. His eyes followed a spinning petal, and a sound escaped his lips. First, a sigh, then a laugh. It wasn't loud or long, but it was unmistakably a laugh, clear, genuine, pure. From high above, Henry couldn't hear the sound, but he saw the movement of his son's shoulders, the head thrown back, the mouth open in an expression he had feared he would never see again. The impact of that image hit him with the force of a stock market crash. His entire net worth, his assets, his multi-million-dollar empire seemed like dust before that single moment. The glass wall of his office, which once gave him a sense of power, of control, suddenly transformed into the barrier of a cage. Gabriel's laugh in the garden echoed in Henry's mind for the rest of the day, a phantom sound that superimposed itself on the constant hum of the financial markets. He tried to focus on performance reports, profit projections, and euro fluctuations, but the images from that morning kept invading his thoughts. The cherry blossom petals, the wind, his son's face transfigured by spontaneous joy. It was a variable he couldn't quantify, an intangible asset whose value he was beginning to suspect was greater than his entire net worth. On an impulse, he cancelled his last meeting of the afternoon, a decision so atypical that his secretary asked if he was feeling well. He answered with a monosyllabic yes, but the truth was he didn't feel well. He felt displaced, as if the axis of his perfectly calculated world had undergone a slight but seismic shift. When he arrived home early, the silence that greeted him was different. It wasn't the usual sterile, heavy silence, but a silence filled with a subtle expectation, like a pause in a melody. He followed a murmur of voices coming from the spacious living room, a space normally only crossed to get to other rooms. And then he saw it. In the center of the room, on the Persian rug that had cost a small fortune, were Anna and Gabriel. The floor around them was covered with pages from old magazines, scissors, tape, and a ball of string. They weren't engaged in any programmed therapy. They were building something, a kite, as Anna called it. The frame was crude, made from bamboo sticks that looked like they'd come from a nearby garden, and the skin was a mosaic of ads for luxury watches and exotic travel destinations. Gabriel was absorbed, holding the tape with a concentration Henry hadn't seen since before the accident. His fingers, often stiff, moved with a new intention. Anna, sitting on the floor beside him, cross-legged, gave instructions with a playful calm, laughing when a piece of tape got stuck on her own nose. The scene was an assault on everything Henry had established for that house. It was messy, improvised, analog, and it was the most alive thing he had ever witnessed within those walls. He stood at the threshold, invisible to them. There were no speeches, no pedagogical lessons, just the quiet, joyful collaboration in creating a fragile object useless for any practical purpose. A knot formed in his throat, the same one he'd felt the day before, but tighter now. It was the realization of his own failure. He had provided the best resources, but had forgotten the essential, the floor, the play, the time. It was Gabriel who saw him first. His eyes lifted and met his father's. For a moment, Henry expected to see a retreat, a shutdown, the return of apathy, but instead the boy smiled, a small but real smile. He held up the unfinished kite, a makeshift trophy. "Dad," he said, his voice a little hesitant from disuse. "Anta come." The word was simple, an invitation, not a plea, but to Henry, it sounded like a call to cross a border he himself had erected. It was an invitation to step down from his pedestal as a provider, to take off his expensive shoes and feel the touch of the rug, to join that small island of creative chaos. He hesitated. The world of business, of stocks and contracts, was his territory. This floor was a foreign country, but his son's gaze held him. Slowly, he took a step into the room, then another. Anna watched him, the smile still on her face, but now with a hint of expectation. Henry loosened the knot of his tie, a mechanical gesture. When he finally reached the rug, he knelt, his tailored trousers protesting the movement. Gabriel handed him a piece of tape. Without thinking, Henry took it and pressed it against a loose corner of the magazine paper. At that moment, in the middle of the afternoon, the light coming through the window hit the kite, and the glint from a diamond had seemed for a second like a piece of the sun. And then the wind, which had previously carried the cherry blossom petals, decided to join the game. A draft from the balcony made the kite tremble, and the line of string, still loose, slipped from Gabriel's hands. The fragile toy slid across the floor, and before anyone could react, the string snapped. For a moment, silence. And then Henry, the man who detested improvisation, who had built his wealth on predictability, laughed. A loud, genuine, and rusty laugh. "We got it," he shouted, and the three of them, as if they were a team formed years ago, chased after the paper fugitive. The clumsy chase after the paper kite broke more than just the silence of the penthouse. It broke a spell. In the days that followed, a subtle but undeniable transformation began to seep into the sterile corridors of that home. Anna didn't impose changes. She simply sowed them, like someone planting sunflowers on windowsills. She discovered that the building's cavernous and rarely used event space was avoided by Gabriel, who felt exposed and small there. So she began to pull life into the heart of the house, the kitchen, It was a space Henry only knew as a passageway, where a private chef prepared nutritionally balanced meals that were served in the dining room. With Anna, the kitchen became a laboratory of smells and tastes. She appeared one afternoon with a bag of flour and a dozen eggs. Henry arrived from the office, his head throbbing with numbers and projections about a new clean tech investment, and found a scene that didn't belong in his universe. The white quartz countertop, normally immaculate, was dusted with flour. Gabriel, sitting at the breakfast nook table with a school notebook open, had a small white smudge on the tip of his nose. And Anna, with a dish towel tied around her waist, was at the stove, trying to teach Henry how to flip a pancake in the air. "It's all in the wrist," she said, laughing, as his first attempt resulted in a shapeless mass stuck to the ceiling. Henry, the man whose steady hand was legendary at the negotiating table, felt like a complete beginner. Gabriel laughed openly, with no trace of the fragile laugh from the garden. He was copying his lessons from school, a homeschooling program that until then was just another task on his schedule. But now he did it in the middle of this organized mess, pausing occasionally to give his opinion on the amount of chocolate syrup. The smell of hot pancakes filled the apartment, an aroma no corporate wellness consultancy could ever replicate. That night, they didn't eat in the formality of the dining room. Anna set the small breakfast nook table with everyday plates and thick glass tumblers filled with organic grape juice. There was no silverware or crystal goblets. It was a simple, almost banal meal. But to Henry, it felt like the most significant banquet of his life. In the middle of dinner, Gabriel raised his glass of juice, the gesture a bit shaky but determined. He looked at his father, then at Anna, and then at the small sunflower they had brought to the kitchen table. "A toast," he said, his voice clear, "because the sun comes in slowly, but it comes in." Henry felt the impact of those words like a punch to the gut. Anna's phrase, spoken in a moment of audacity, had become a mantra, a truth for his son. He raised his glass, his eyes stinging. In that instant, he wasn't the multimillionaire, the business titan, the master of the financial universe. He was just a father, relearning his own son's language, a language that didn't involve dividends or cash flow, but burnt pancakes and toasts with grape juice. The change wasn't just internal. Henry began to notice small details he had previously ignored. Soft music played during the day, replacing the oppressive silence. One of the plastic superheroes had finally been freed from its packaging and now stood guard next to the sunflower pot. The apartment was, little by little, gaining a soul. But this new dynamic, so full of promise, was about to face its first real test. The following week, Gabriel's first trial class at a regular school was scheduled, a crucial step in his recovery plan, meticulously orchestrated by Beatrice and the doctors. Henry felt optimistic for the first time in months. He saw the progress, he saw the light coming in, but he, a born strategist, had forgotten that sometimes the hardest part isn't opening the window, but facing what's on the other side. The city, with its noises, its crowds, and its confined spaces, was waiting. The morning of the trial class dawned with a clear sky, a deceptive contrast to the storm of anxiety brewing inside Henry. He put on his best suit, his usual armor, as if formality could impose order on the chaos of emotions. Gabriel, for his part, was dressed in the new uniform, the school's vibrant colors looking strange on his body, accustomed to the neutral tones of home clothes. Anna, sensing the tension, kept up a light conversation about the types of trees they would see on the way, trying to build a bridge of normality over the abyss of the unknown. Beatrice awaited them in the lobby, the folder with Gabriel's medical reports in hand, her face a mask of professional efficiency. For her, this was a logistical operation. For Henry, It felt like the IPO of his own soul. The problem didn't start at the school, with its noisy hallways and curious glances. It started in the place Henry mastered most, the elevator. Not the private one in his building, but the school's, smaller, older, and with a faint smell of cleaning supplies. As soon as the metal doors closed, trapping them in the cubicle with 3 other people, the air seemed to thin. Gabriel, who had been quiet but calm, began to breathe rapidly and shallowly. His eyes widened, fixed on an invisible point in front of him. His hands gripped the arms of his chair with a force that turned his knuckles white. The soft beep of each ascending floor sounded like a countdown alarm to a catastrophe. Henry froze. He knew what this was. A panic attack. The same kind his son had in the early days at the hospital. His instinct was to intervene with logic, with control. Gabriel breathed deeply. "We're almost there. It's just an elevator." But his words, which moved boards of directors and closed multi-million-dollar deals, were useless here. They couldn't reach the boy, lost in a terror that reason couldn't touch. Beatrice started fumbling in her bag, perhaps for a prescribed sedative, the pharmaceutical solution to an emotional problem. It was Anna who acted. With a calmness that seemed to spring from an inexhaustible source, she knelt in front of Gabriel, ignoring the tight space and the stares of the other passengers. She didn't say, "Calm down." Instead, she placed her hand gently over his. "Gabriel, look at me," she said, her voice low and melodious. "Let's breathe together. Breathe in with me, slowly. 1, 2, 3. Now out. 1, 2, 3, 4. She breathed with him, the sound of her exhale a gentle guide in the darkness of his panic. As the boy's breathing began to steady, still ragged but less desperate, she began to hum, a simple melody, an old wordless lullaby. The sound filled the tense silence of the elevator. The doors opened on the correct floor, and the school hallway appeared, bright and noisy. Henry and Beatrice were paralyzed. Anna, however, continued to hum as she pushed the chair out and into a quieter corner. "I was a music volunteer at a children's hospital for 2 years, she explained to Henry later, her voice devoid of any pride, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I learned that sometimes music can reach where words can't." The crisis had been contained, but the damage was done. The school principal, a kind but cautious man, had observed the scene from a distance. In the meeting that followed, he was diplomatic. Perhaps a more gradual integration would be ideal, he suggested, which, in educational jargon, was a polite no. The final blow, however, came from Beatrice. In the car, during the heavy silence of the ride home, she turned to Henry, her tone carefully neutral. "Henry, your family's image is an important asset. You know that. The narrative we've built is one of absolute privacy, of controlled recovery. Anna's presence, however well-intentioned, introduces an element of unpredictability." She paused, choosing her words like an investor choosing stocks. "She is a risk to the plan, to the image. Perhaps it's time to reevaluate her role." The antagonism that arose there was not that of a soap opera villain. It was clean, professional, coated in a veneer of concern and business logic. But for Henry, the message was clear. The world he had built and the world Anna was revealing might not be able to coexist, and he would have to choose. Beatrice's suggestion hung in the air for days, cold and logical, seeping into the cracks of Henry's new routine. Risk, the word he mastered most, that he had learned to calculate, mitigate, and turn into profit. He analyzed Anna as he would a new asset in his investment portfolio. The pros were evident. Gabriel's laugh, the pancakes, the sense of life that had returned to the apartment. The cons, presented by Beatrice, were equally clear. The unpredictability, the breach of protocol, the unwanted exposure. The elevator crisis had been a red flag on his mental spreadsheet. The recovery plan, so carefully mapped out, had suffered its first major setback. Cold business logic told him to cut his losses, to return to the controlled environment, to trust the experts and remove the human variable that was Anna. But his heart, an organ he usually ignored in important decisions, hesitated. The decision was, in a way, taken out of his hands. One afternoon, while reviewing the statements for his investment funds, the phone rang. It was from the agency that had hired Anna. The voice on the other end was polite but direct. "Mr. Wright, we're just calling to confirm the end date of Miss Anna's temporary contract. As per the initial 6-week agreement, her service concludes next Friday." Henry was speechless. 6 weeks. He had completely forgotten the deadline. In his mind, Anna's presence had become a constant, not a service with an expiration date. The news landed like a silent bomb, revealing the fragility of this new equilibrium. He had only one more week. The revelation made him see everything in a new light, an urgency he hadn't felt since he'd risked a considerable part of his fortune on a tech company on the brink of bankruptcy. He needed more data, more time. On that cold Saturday morning, he made another impulsive decision. "We're going to Central Park," he announced at breakfast. Beatrice, who had shown up for a planning meeting, nearly dropped her tablet. "But the protocol," she began. "The protocol can wait," Henry cut in, his tone final. He wanted to see the three of them, the unit they had become, outside the walls of the apartment, in the heart of the city. In the park, the autumn wind swept dry leaves across the pavement. The three of them, bundled in coats, walked in silence to the edge of the lake. The air was chilly but clean. They watched a rowing team practice, the boats gliding over the dark water in mesmerizing synchrony, the rhythm of the oars, the athlete's breath, the sound of the water. There was a peace in that joint effort that contrasted with the solitary struggle they were waging. It was Gabriel who broke the silence. "Dad," he said, his gaze fixed on the boats. "At school, they're going to have a spring fair." Henry turned to him, surprised. "Really?" he asked, his voice soft. "Yeah. The teacher mentioned it on the trial day. There will be banners, a bonfire, and square dancing." Gabriel looked at his father, and for the first time, Henry saw not just a wish, but a plan in his son's eyes. "I wanted to go. Could we try again?" The question was simple, but it contained a universe of courage. To try again. After the humiliation, the panic, the veiled rejection. It wasn't just about the fair, it was about not giving up. And that's where the city, with its vibrant culture and traditions, powerfully entered their story. The Spring Fair, an event with a controlled bonfire, colorful banners, improvised accessible square dancing, and caramel corn crumbling in your fingers. It was the antithesis of Henry's corporate world. It was messy, loud, communal, and it was exactly what Gabriel was asking for, a chance to be a child among other children. At that moment, by the lake, Henry felt the scales tip. Beatrice's logic, the protection of privacy, risk management, it all seemed small in the face of that request. "Yes, son," he said, his voice firm. "We'll go." It was a turning point. The decision not just to open the window, but to jump into the garden outside, with all its flowers and thorns. But as he felt a wave of determination, he didn't notice a figure approaching. An elegant woman, with dark sunglasses that didn't hide the apprehension on her face. It was Claire, his ex-partner, Gabriel's mother. She never showed up unannounced, and her face did not bring good news. "Henry," she said, her voice tense, ignoring Anna. "We need to talk alone. I received a proposal from a rehabilitation center in Boston. They're the best in the world. I think we should take Gabriel." Claire's proposal fell upon the cold Central Park morning like an unexpected frost, freezing the moment of warm promise. Boston. The name sounded like a verdict, a seal of medical excellence that their money could and, in her view, should buy. Henry felt torn in two. One part of him, the business strategist, immediately recognized the logic of the proposal. It was the best, the most expensive, the path with the highest probability of measurable returns. It would be a massive investment, but his fortune was built for moments exactly like this, to guarantee access to the top of the pyramid in any sector, including healthcare. The other part of him, however, the one that had rediscovered the feeling of chasing a kite, felt a visceral resistance. Taking Gabriel to Boston meant uprooting him from the fertile ground where an unlikely laugh had just sprouted. "Henry, our fortune is useless if it's not to give him the best chance," Claire said, as they moved a few steps away, leaving Anna and Gabriel near a beverage cart. Her voice was a mixture of love and panic. "I've seen the videos, read the articles. The technology they use, it's cutting edge. We can't settle for improvisations." The word improvisations was uttered with a quick glance in Anna's direction, a subtle but precise blow. For Claire, the wealth they shared was a tool, an obligation to seek perfection, and Anna's approach, with her sunflowers and pancakes, seemed dangerously amateurish, a sentimental gamble against science. Henry didn't know what to say. Arguing for Anna would seem like defending sentimentality against logic, something he had spent his entire life avoiding. Before he could formulate a response, Anna approached, pushing Gabriel's chair. She didn't seem offended or intimidated. Her gaze toward Claire was surprisingly calm. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Gabriel is getting a little cold. While you two talk, perhaps you and I could get a hot coffee at that kiosk. Henry can stay with him here." It wasn't a challenge, but an invitation to neutral territory. Claire hesitated, surprised by the initiative, but eventually agreed. Seated at a small plastic table, with the steam from 2 paper cups of coffee rising between them, the silence was dense. It was Claire who broke it. "I don't know what your intentions are," she began, her voice low but firm, "but Gabriel is not a project. He's my son." Anna met her gaze without flinching. "And I know," she replied, "and I've never thought of him any other way. You're scared, and you have every right to be." The empathy in Anna's voice disarmed some of Claire's hostility. "I'm not here to replace doctors or therapies," Anna continued. "I'm here to remind Gabriel how good it is to be a child, because no physical therapy in the world will work if he doesn't have a reason to want to get out of bed in the morning. Boston might fix the muscles, maybe, but what will fix his will to laugh?" Anna paused, looking at her own hands around the warm cup. "I lost a younger brother. He didn't have an accident, but an illness that kept him at home for a long time. I watched my parents turn his room into a hospital room. They did everything right, everything the doctors said, but they forgot to open the window. They forgot that before he was a patient, he was a boy who loved the smell of rain." The confession was an unexpected gift, a piece of her own pain offered as a peace gesture. Claire stared at her, the eyes behind the dark glasses now vulnerable. They were 2 women from different worlds, one with the power of wealth, the other with the strength of experience, but both united by the same fierce love. They weren't fighting for territory, they were fighting for care. "The spring fair," Claire said, almost in a whisper. "Do you think it's a good idea? The exposure, the noise." "I think it's his idea," Anna replied, "and that's what matters most." Claire was silent for a long time. Finally, she took off her glasses. "All right," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "The fair, let's see how he reacts. But if I feel for 1 second that this is hurting him, the plane to Boston takes off the following week." Anna nodded. "Fair enough." A truce had been sealed. When they returned, Henry watched them, waiting for the verdict. Claire approached him. "I'll think about it. But first, the promise. Take our son to the fair." And with that, she left, leaving Henry with an even heavier choice. The celebration of his son's joy had now become the final test for his family's future. The truce established in Central Park brought a temporary peace. But the undercurrent of expectations and external pressures continued to pull. As the days advanced toward the spring fair, the apartment's routine filled with a mix of hope and anxiety. Anna and Gabriel spent hours researching the history of square dancing, watching videos of festivals from across the country, and even improvising clumsy steps in the living room. Henry watched, a discreet smile on his lips, feeling the lightness those moments brought. He was beginning to understand that the true value of his assets wasn't just in the wealth he accumulated, but in the ability to provide experiences that no amount of money could directly buy. However, this new perspective clashed with the unforgiving reality of his business and with Beatrice's vision, who saw the nanny as a destabilizing force for his public image. The romance, or the promise of it, grew in discreet interludes, in accidental touches that seemed more intentional, hands brushing as they reached for the same coffee mug in the kitchen, glances that quickly averted at the distant sound of a saxophone from Fifth Avenue on a car-free Sunday, echoing a melody of unspoken possibilities. Henry found himself thinking of Anna outside the context of Gabriel, noticing the way her yellow scarf seemed to bring color to any room, the playful intelligence in her eyes. She, in turn, saw beyond the man of incalculable fortune, seeing the anguished father, the man who carried guilt like an invisible burden, seeking a redemption he didn't know how to achieve. But these moments were like small air bubbles in a stormy sea. The obstacles arose, as concrete as the skyscrapers of Wall Street. For Anna, staying in New York meant giving up a tempting offer that had arrived from a bilingual school in Chicago, which wanted her joy and inventive methods as the trademark of a new campus. It was a solid career opportunity, with a salary that represented a significant profit and the chance to develop her project of accessible playrooms. For Henry, opening his heart and keeping Anna around meant confronting the board of his own company. The next major twist came in a cold call from his primary investor, a fellow billionaire whose shares represented a considerable slice of his capital. Henry, we've heard rumors of a domestic distraction. Our profitability depends on your focus, not personal projects. We suggest you place Gabriel back under the exclusive care of therapists. We cannot allow incidents to affect shareholder confidence and the company's cash flow. The injustice set in. He was the father, the billionaire who had built an empire, yet he was being called out as if he were neglecting his duties to his investors' treasure. The defining moment came on the night of a charity gala at the Met, a high-glamour event where Henry was the host. Beatrice, in her role as guardian of the perfect image, had pushed him into a speech about resilience and the human spirit's capacity for overcoming adversity, empty phrases that rang hollow in his ears. As he spoke about market challenges and the importance of reinvesting in society, his gaze searched for Anna and Gabriel. They were further away, near one of the museum's enormous windows, the boy in his chair, the nanny in a simple dress that stood out in the crowd of designer gowns, sharing a makeshift bag of popcorn. The image was as out of place as Gabriel's laugh in the garden, and as real as the smell of simple banana bread. After the speech, Henry walked toward them, feeling like an imposter in the spotlight. When he got close, Gabriel was absorbed in something, and Anna was holding a small, worn sketchbook. She smiled as she flipped through it, an expression of fondness and nostalgia. "You still keep this," she said, her voice low, looking at a drawing of a small cardboard house with wheels. Henry leaned in. I found it when I was organizing Gabriel's things. I thought it was yours." The sketchbook was, in fact, hers. Her old, shelved project, with ideas for accessible spaces made from cheap and recycled materials. He had realized before that the sketchbook wasn't his son's, but he had kept it without saying anything, without asking. It was a secret link, a pledge to a dream he didn't know she had. At that moment, amidst the sophistication and opulence of the Met, Henry felt that behind the empathetic and inventive Nanny, there was a universe of passions and talents he was just beginning to glimpse. And the idea of losing all of that, not just Anna's presence, but her impact on Gabriel's life and his own, began to feel unbearable. The school's spring fair, which should have been the climax of Gabriel's social recovery, approached laden with an almost unbearable tension. It was the event that would seal the family's fate, either a brave step toward a new normality in New York or the confirmation of the need for an escape to the sterile environment of Boston. Henry felt the weight of the choice in every decision, from buying a plaid shirt for his son to the tense conversation with the school's security team to ensure discreet access. Anna, for her part, tried to keep the atmosphere light, decorating Gabriel's wheelchair with small, colorful banners, turning it into a sort of personal parade float. But even her optimism seemed a bit forced, given what was at stake. The night before the fair, while Anna was putting Gabriel to bed, Henry found his son still awake, staring at the ceiling where the lights from neighboring buildings cast dancing shadows. Henry sat on the edge of the bed, a gesture that had become more natural in recent weeks. "Excited for tomorrow?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Gabriel didn't answer immediately. He turned his face to his father, and his eyes, usually so expressive, were clouded with a melancholy Henry couldn't decipher. "Dad," the boy began, his voice low, almost a whisper. When I laugh, I forget." Henry frowned. "Forget what, son?" Gabriel swallowed hard. "I forget the accident. I forget I can't run after the kite. Everything is good again." Henry felt a momentary relief. "But that's great, Gabriel. Laughing is good." The boy shook his head slowly. "No, Dad, because after I remember, and it hurts again. It hurts more, because I had forgotten." His son's confession hit Henry with the force of a tidal wave, tearing down all his defenses, all his concepts of overcoming and resilience. He had been celebrating the laughs as victories, as progress indicators, without ever imagining the pain that came after, the echo of loss that each moment of joy brought. The guilt he carried for the accident was a heavy burden, but the guilt his son felt for being happy was an unimaginable cruelty. He realized, with devastating clarity, that he was trying to fix his son's legs when the deepest wound was in his soul. It was with this weight on his heart that Henry woke up the next day and was confronted with the all is lost moment. A blind item, discreet but venomous, had been published in a widely read online gossip column. The anonymous source lamented the exploitation of the image of a well-known billionaire's son, suggesting that a charismatic caregiver was using the situation to promote a personal inclusion project, complete with a viral video of a kite in a garden. The item was a masterpiece of manipulation, insinuating self-interest and self-promotion where there had only been care and affection. Henry didn't have to think hard to know the source of the leak. Beatrice, with her zeal for the perfect image, had acted, creating a crisis to force the solution she believed was correct. The fallout was immediate and brutal. His family's name, which he protected as fiercely as he protected his most valuable investments, was being tarnished. Claire called, her voice trembling with anger and fear. "I warned you, Henry. I warned you that the exposure was a risk." The company board sent a curt email and suggesting immediate action to contain the damage. The pressure was overwhelming. Cornered, Henry made the only decision that seemed possible to protect everyone. He had to send Anna away, temporarily, he told himself, just until the dust settled. The conversation was the hardest thing he had ever done. Anna listened in silence, her face losing its color, but she didn't shed a single tear. She didn't defend herself, didn't argue. She just nodded, a quiet dignity that made it all the more painful. "I understand," was all she said. The apartment door closed with a soft click, but the sound echoed like an explosion. The silence that followed was different from all the others. It was the silence of absence. Gabriel, who had overheard the conversation from his room, didn't cry. He just shut down, the apathy returning like an old, unwanted coat. That night, in the impeccable and empty penthouse, Henry looked at the wilting sunflower on the windowsill and realized, with a cold dread, that the absence of her voice, of the smell of banana bread, of her stubborn belief in the light, cost more than any contract, more than any stock, more than his entire fortune. Anna's absence turned the penthouse into an empty shell, where every sound seemed amplified and every silence an accusation. Henry tried to fill the void with the old routine, therapists with rigid schedules, balanced meals served on time, progress reports sent by Beatrice with cold efficiency, but it was useless. It was like trying to warm a house by removing the furniture and painting the walls a warm color. The structure remained cold, uninhabited. Gabriel had regressed to a state of apathy that was even deeper than before, a silent resignation that pained Henry more than any cry or protest. The wheelchair, stripped of its colorful banners, was once again just a piece of medical equipment. The nights were the worst. Sleepless, Henry wandered the apartment, the city of New York twinkling outside, indifferent to his torment. On one of those pre-dawn mornings, with a light rain tapping against the glass, he felt suffocated. He grabbed his coat and went out, aimlessly. He found himself walking down a street in Midtown, the headlights reflecting on the wet asphalt. The city, which he had always viewed from above, from his control tower, now enveloped him with its smells of damp concrete and exhaust. He entered a 24-hour diner, the aroma of coffee and bacon an unexpected balm. Sitting at a simple booth, he ordered a coffee, and he, out of pure habit, took out his phone. But instead of opening his stock market app, his fingers took him to his photo gallery. There was an image there, one he had taken without anyone noticing, Anna and Gabriel in the kitchen, covered in flour, laughing. That's when he remembered the sketchbook. He had put it in his briefcase to return to her, but in her abrupt departure, he had forgotten. He rushed home, urgency replacing his lethargy. He found the sketchbook and began flipping through it under the lamplight. There were dozens of drawings, notes, ideas, accessible playrooms built with cardboard, Velcro, plastic bottles, and fabric scraps, ramps made of old books, sensory panels with different textures, all designed to be cheap, replicable, and above all, fun. The dates on the pages confirmed what he already suspected. This project was old, born long before she met Gabriel, long before she knew of his fortune. A detail on one of the last pages caught his eye, a note with an address in Midtown, Cultural Center, presentation of social projects, May 15th. Henry felt a chill. He knew that street. It was on the same block as the caregiver agency he had contacted. The date was the day of Anna's first interview. The next major twist revealed itself, not with a bang, but with the quiet clarity of puzzle pieces snapping into place. Anna hadn't sought him out. She hadn't gone after his wealth or his son's story. She was on the same street, on the same day, to pursue her own dream. The job as Gabriel's nanny, which the agency offered her as a last-minute opportunity, had been a fluke, a coincidence of fate. Beatrice's leaked item, Claire's suspicion, the board's distrust. It was all a lie built on a false premise. He hadn't been a target. He had been a detour on her journey. The revelation clarified his internal conflict brutally. His entire life had been defined by authority, by control, by the ability to foresee and manipulate outcomes. He saw love, vulnerability, as a loss of power, but now he understood. Loving wasn't losing authority, it was choosing a priority. And his priority was sitting in the next room, in silence, blaming himself for his own joy. The fortune he had amassed, the assets he managed, the businesses he commanded, all of it was just a means, not the end. The end was his son's laugh, the smell of banana bread in the kitchen, the color of a yellow scarf. He stood up, the sketchbook in his hand. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the grey New York sky with shades of pink and orange. For the first time in a long time, Henry knew exactly what he had to do. It wasn't an investment, it wasn't a negotiation, it was a reparation. The clarity the dawn brought Henry solidified into a plan of action, executed with the same precision he used to architect a hostile takeover, but driven by a different kind of capital, conviction. The first call, at 7 in the morning, was to the chairman of his company's board. The charity gala the following night, where he was slated to receive an award for strategic philanthropy, was the starting point. "I'm not going," Henry said, his voice firm, leaving no room for negotiation. On the other end of the line, silence was followed by a series of protests about image, commitments, and investor confidence. "My family needs me," he cut in, "and the company, as of today, will have a new focus for its philanthropy." He called an emergency board meeting for that afternoon. In the grand conference room, with the city stretching out below them, Henry didn't talk about interest rates or dividends. He opened Anna's sketchbook on the polished mahogany table. "This," he announced, "is our next major investment." He presented the idea of creating a Children's Accessibility Institute, fully funded by the company, whose first pilot project would be to build accessible playrooms in public schools in underserved New York boroughs. Anna's detailed and passionate project would be the heart of the initiative. It wasn't charity, it was an investment in human capital, in social innovation, a legacy more lasting than any fluctuation of his gold or crypto assets. The initial reaction was skepticism. Beatrice, present at the meeting, tried to interject, talking about focusing on core business and managing image liabilities. That's when Henry confronted her directly, presenting proof of her manipulation of the gossip column. Her denial was weak, and the silent disdain from the other board members sealed her fate. She wasn't fired spectacularly, but her downfall was swift and quiet, a liability being discreetly removed from the balance sheet. Faced with Henry's determination and the simple genius of Anna's project, the board relented. The proposal was approved. The next stop was Claire's apartment. He found her anxious, the Boston suitcases already visible in the corner of the room. He didn't argue, didn't plead. He just told her the truth about the sketchbook, the coincidence, Beatrice's manipulation, and most importantly, about Gabriel's confession, the pain his laughter caused him. "Boston can give him the best technology, Claire, but it can't give him permission to be happy. We can." He showed her the plan for the institute, with Anna's name as the director of the pilot project. "This isn't marketing, it's a mission. Give us a chance. 6 months, with clear clauses for stability and monitoring. If there isn't real improvement, not just physical but emotional, I'll take him to Boston myself." Seeing the genuine gesture, the vulnerability in the man who had always been a fortress of control, she relented. The suitcases were unpacked. The search for Anna led him to the last place he expected, the Port Authority bus terminal. The departure board announced buses to Chicago. He found her near Gate 12, sitting on a plastic bench, the same simple bag at her feet, the yellow scarf in her hair looking a little less vibrant under the cold terminal lights. She was about to accept the school's offer to leave New York behind. The final confrontation between them wasn't explosive, but disarmed and intense. Under the echo of platform announcements and the smell of diesel, he stopped in front of her. "Don't go," he said, his voice hoarse. "Stay." He explained everything, the institute, Beatrice's dismissal, the truce with Claire. But the most important thing was what came next. "I need you," he continued, "not as an employee, as a partner, in the project, and in life." She listened, her face impassive, but her eyes studying his every micro-expression. When he finished, she didn't smile or cry. "I have conditions," she said, her voice firm. Total transparency, space to be myself without having to fit into anyone's image, and time for Gabriel and for us to figure out what we are without rushing. Henry agreed to every point, and then he did the hardest thing. He told her about his own guilt, about the unmissable meeting, about the what if that haunted him every night. For the first time, he wasn't the billionaire, the boss, the provider. He was just a man, broken and trying to rebuild, asking for help. Anna reached out and, instead of taking his hand, gently touched his face. "Let's go home, Henry," she said. "Our son is waiting." Anna's return to the penthouse was not a loud celebration, but a quiet, profound reunion. Gabriel, upon seeing her enter the living room, said nothing. He simply held his arms out to her, a gesture worth more than any speech. Anna knelt beside his chair, and they stayed that way for a long moment, an embrace that healed the wound of separation. Henry watched the scene, his heart tight with gratitude. The home, which had reverted to being just a structure of glass and concrete, instantly regained its soul. The scent of banana bread seemed to have returned, embedded in Anna's clothes, and the afternoon light, streaming through the windowsill, seemed less grey. The following days were ones of careful reconstruction. The new rules, set by Anna and accepted by Henry, created an environment of honesty and respect. Decisions about Gabriel were made jointly, at a kitchen table that had become the true center of power in that home. A place where the boy's opinion held the same weight as medical reports or financial projections. Claire became a constant presence, not as a supervisor, but as a partner. The conversation she'd had with Anna in Central Park, combined with Henry's transparent attitude, had broken down the walls of distrust. She joined them for simple dinners, helped Gabriel with his homework, and gradually began to see Anna not as a threat, but as an unlikely and valuable ally in her son's journey. The resolution of the main conflicts occurred organically, without dramatic confrontations. The Children's Accessibility Institute began to take shape, with Anna leading meetings with architects and educators. Her sketchbook transformed into a solid and inspiring business plan. Henry discovered a new kind of satisfaction in using his vast network and capital not to multiply his fortune, but to build something with purpose. He learned to delegate more in his business, finding that the empire wouldn't crumble if he left early for a physical therapy session, or spent the afternoon helping to paint cardboard boxes for the playroom prototype. The injustice he had felt at being called out by investors transformed into a conscious choice. His greatest asset was his family, and any investment that protected and nurtured it was by definition the most profitable of all. Each character's arc found its conclusion. Claire, the terrified mother, learned to balance fear with trust, allowing Gabriel to take calculated risks and celebrating his small victories without the constant shadow of what if. Henry, the self-contained man, began to dismantle his armor of control, learning that true strength wasn't in avoiding pain, but in living and sharing it. He finally forgave himself for his absence on the day of the accident, understanding that guilt paralyzed him, while love moved him forward. And Anna, who had always felt temporary, a guest in the lives of others, finally accepted that she deserved to stay, that her worth wasn't in her ability to fix others, but in her skill at creating spaces where they could fix themselves. The final major twist happened on an ordinary afternoon during a physical therapy session on the penthouse balcony. There was no miracle, no dramatic recovery. It was something small, almost imperceptible. As the therapist worked on his leg muscles, Gabriel, who hadn't felt anything below his knees for months, felt a tingle, a flicker. "Dad," he called out, his voice surprised. "I felt that." It was a minimal breakthrough, a spark of neural connection in a long severed cable, but for them, it was as if the sun had risen on that balcony. The news didn't reignite false hopes of a full cure, but it reignited something much more important: courage. That same afternoon, it was Gabriel who made the request. "I want to fly the kite again, down in the garden, now." The winter wind was beginning to blow, sharp and cold, and the leftover banners from the spring fair they never attended fluttered on a neighboring balcony. Henry looked at Anna, a silent question in his eyes. She just smiled and nodded. It was time to face the garden again, not as a test, but as a celebration of that small sensation, that tiny step forward. It was proof that joy no longer had to be a reminder of pain, but fuel to keep fighting. The building's garden greeted them with the cold breath of a New York winter. The sky was the color of lead, and the wind, more insistent now, whistled through the gaps between skyscrapers, carrying the scent of damp earth and the promise of a frigid night. The few cherry blossom petals left on the ground were dry, memories of a bygone season. But there, in the center of the lawn, the three of them formed a point of color and warmth. Henry, without the suit that had so long served as his armor, held the end of the string reel with a firmness that came not from strength, but from presence. Anna, beside the wheelchair, had her hand resting on Gabriel's shoulder, a gesture of support, not control. And Gabriel, his face lifted to the sky, held the kite string, the mosaic of luxury ads looking like a piece of abstract art against the grey immensity. They didn't have to run this time. The wind did all the work. The kite rose, shaky at first, then with growing confidence, dancing on the invisible air currents. The line grew taut, vibrating with the tension of freedom. And then it happened. Gabriel laughed. It wasn't the fragile, surprised laugh from the first time, nor a laugh punctuated by the pain of memory. It was a full, open sound that rose to the heavens along with the paper toy. It was the laugh of a boy who wasn't forgetting his pain, but learning to fly with it, to let it be part of the landscape of his life, not the entirety of it. He laughed without fear of forgetting, because now he knew that joy and sorrow could live together, side by side, in his heart. Henry looked at Anna over his son's head, and in that gaze, the past 6 weeks condensed. Her audacity on the first day, the sunflower on the windowsill, the pancakes in the kitchen, the hard conversation in the park, the pain of her departure, and the sweetness of her return. His entire net worth, his fortune in stocks and priceless assets, seemed like mere numbers on a distant spreadsheet. The real return, the profit that mattered, was here, in the sound of that laugh and the warmth of Anna's hand that now found his, lacing their fingers together over Gabriel's shoulder. They said nothing. They didn't need to. They understood. In that moment of silent communion, that every victory, no matter how small, a tingle in a leg, a kite in the air, would take effort. And that was okay. Their new balance wasn't born from the absence of problems, but from the mutual decision to open the window every day, slowly, but without ever giving up. The city, with its noise and its haste, rumbled below them. But here, on this small patch of grass, they had found their own rhythm. When the wind calmed and the kite began to descend, Gabriel reeled it in with a composure he hadn't possessed before. He looked up at the small pot on their apartment windowsill, where the first sunflower had already given way to a new sprout. "Dad," he said, his voice firm, filled with a new certainty, "we need to plant another sunflower right next to that one." Henry smiled, his heart overflowing. "We do. And why is that?" Gabriel turned his face to him and to Anna, his eyes shining with the wisdom that only pain teaches. "For when the sun takes its time," he answered. In that simple sentence resided the final resolution of their journey. Love, they had learned, was not the guarantee of a perpetually blue sky, but the act of planting flowers in hope of the light, even on the greyest of days. It was the promise that, together, they would always have a private sun, growing slowly, but always growing within them.